I've been a pretty big fan of how the Spurs have handled things so far throughout this offseason. So obviously last season they had an amazing showing from Victor Wembanyama. But one thing that comes with having a guy who's talented like a Victor Wembanyama, right? Someone who has like superstar, megastar level upside, a team has to figure out how to create the best situation possible around that type of talent, right? In order to optimize on his prime years. So a perfect example of a team that's struggling with that are the Sixers. You have Joel Embiid. He is a very talented player, but he's not getting any younger. We're seeing him put up these great numbers and they're not winning. So essentially, it's kind of being looked at right now where Embiid's prime is getting wasted a bit. And again, that's not just the Sixers front office. I think they made pretty good moves in making sure they've kept good guys around him. And some of that is on him as he's kind of dwindled his play down in the playoffs. But you see what I'm saying, right? Teams want to make sure they're creating the best team situation around their talented guys. Look at the Warriors with Stephen Curry. He's still a high-quality player. He is still, in my opinion, the best point guard in the league, but he's not getting any younger, right? Are they going to optimize on these last good years of Steph Curry's career, right? So you want to make sure you're creating the best team situation possible around that talent. You don't want to waste that talent by having a guy put up these impressive numbers, have these accolades while never winning. And so one of the biggest things for the Spurs when it comes to getting them on that next level throughout this rebuilding process is making sure they are mature from an offensive standpoint, right? So looking at the OKC Thunder as an example, one of the biggest reasons why they were great last season. Yes, they were very talented, but they played a very mature style of basketball on the offensive end. Contrast that to a team like the Detroit Pistons. Very talented, a lot of really good young talent on that team. They just did not play a mature level of basketball. Look at the Spurs here, right? Great team, great young talent. Their biggest factor as far as improvement this coming season is figuring out a way to play a more mature style of basketball offensively. And I think they've done a good job at addressing that need this offseason. So kind of look at the moves they made. They picked up Chris Paul and signed him to a one-year deal, and also picked up Harrison Barnes via trade, and also drafted Stephon Castle. So he kind of outside of that mold of getting a veteran guy, but still, that was a big-time roster addition. And I think a really mature player coming out of college, playing in that UConn system that requires players to play a very disciplined style of basketball. So I think they've done a good job at getting themselves better from a maturity standpoint. Let's start with Chris Paul, right? Who's like the biggest, most mature guy on this roster, right? Just being a great playmaker. He's still a very high quality player, even though he's older. Came off the bench last season for the Warriors and averaged 9 points and 7 assists on efficient splits. And look at the Spurs and some of their numbers last year. They were top 10 in field goal attempts, but bottom half in general field goal percentage. They were probably getting up a lot of shots, but they were not the best shots possible, right? The best shots available. Chris Paul helps you with that. Chris Paul, being one of the best playmakers ever, is going to generate easier looks for them, right? So again, helping to mature them on the offensive end. And we've seen him do this with other young teams. So when he got to OKC in 2019, he played alongside with SGA and Lou Dort, and they got to the playoffs and lost in a close 7-game first-round series against the Rockets in the bubble. But they were really good because they benefited off of the maturity that he offered to this team on the offensive end. Same with the Suns. He gets over to Phoenix in that 2020-21 season. They're immediately a contender. He gets there and he helps them be a really mature offensive team. That's something that Chris Paul brings to the table that's going to be very important for the Spurs to kind of take their play to the next level this coming year, right? Just generating easier looks, organizing the offense, helping with decision-making. And one of the biggest things we talked about last season with Victor Wembanyama was the fact that he didn't play a lot of times with a very competent playmaker. I want to give some credit to Trey Jones, right? He was good at times when he was on the court with Wemby, but Trey Jones isn't Chris Paul, right? Chris Paul is going to unlock a major part of Victor Wembanyama's offense. Those are the things that he brings to the table for this team. Also, that's key when it comes to helping a rebuilding team and getting them to the next level year in and year out is figuring out how to close out games. We hear people talk about this all the time, saying things like this team has to figure out how to win games, right? And a lot of that comes down to executing down the stretch. Last year, the Spurs were 25th in clutch offensive rating and 26th in clutch turnover percentage, which kind of speaks to their lack of playmaking. Chris Paul is a really good guy to have on the court when it comes to finishing and closing games out. He's been a really good closing point guard throughout the course of his career. Again, he's not in his prime, but he still has that left in him, or I think, or I hope he has that left in him. The basketball fit with Chris Paul here in San Antonio makes a ton of sense. Your only question is his availability. So his last couple of seasons, he has not played over 60 games. I think he played 58 last season and 58 the year before, right? So there is just that, the availability of Chris Paul. If he doesn't hit that 60 game mark at least, then your question is, how much of a benefit is he really providing your team, right? Was he out there enough for there to be some positive change being made out there? Maybe in spurts, but not largely if he's only playing 60 games or so, right? So that's the only question, is his availability. But the basketball fit makes a ton of sense. He's going to do a ton for Wemby. He's going to do a ton for Devin Vassell. He's just going to open up this Spurs offense a ton. And also just the tandem of him and Greg Popovich, they're going to be such a good team from a planning standpoint, from an execution standpoint. Big time move by the front office. Again, a low-key move because Chris Paul is much older, right? He's not in his prime anymore, but I think it's going to mean a lot for the Spurs' maturity and their development throughout this rebuild process. Then they add another very mature offensive player in Harrison Barnes. Barnes' thing is he's very available. He's not missing a ton of games. Good veteran presence, even won a championship. So you have championship experience on this roster, a good knockdown shooter, and he can do some creating in the post, primarily if he ends up catching a mismatch. They're not going to be asking him to do that a ton, especially with guys like Wembanyama here and Devin Vassell here and guys like that and Chris Paul. But that's something he can bring to the table if need be. Generally, he provides great floor spacing and experience, right? So just again, that experience, that maturity, he provides that. His only issue would be his defense. He's a bit of a cone on that end, and there are times where he can kind of shoot himself out the game, but generally another very good, mature starter to plug into that starting lineup, to plug into that roster. He provides spacing and three-point shooting to a team that was not good from a three-point percentage standpoint at all. They were 28th in three-point percentage, despite being very high in three-point attempts. So again, same thing as with Chris Paul. They got up a lot of attempts from the floor. They weren't knocking them down efficiently. That ended up finding its way out to the three-point line where they got up a lot of three-point shots, but they were not knocking them down. Harrison Barnes can be a knockdown three-point shooter, right? So that's the upside with having those two guys here in Chris Paul and Barnes. There's more efficiency within the offense. There's Paul's ability to create these looks, to create really efficient looks, and Barnes' ability to convert on those opportunities. So like I said, that within and of itself will be a major stepping stone for the Spurs. I said it a million times already on this video. One of the things that rebuilding teams struggle with is offensive maturity, and that is what these guys are going to be able to bring to the table. Again, Paul brings that to the table at a very high level. We've seen him do that over the course of his career. Only question here, only issues is for one, Barnes' defense and also Paul's availability, but the basketball sense makes a ton of sense here for the Spurs. And I think when talking about the Spurs offense, something we forget about a lot, and I kind of get it because Wembanyama is that good. He makes you forget about the other things going on here in San Antonio. We have to talk about Devin Vassell. His progression from year one has been amazing. He averaged 5 points in his first season, 12 in year two, then 18 in year three. Then he gets a big-time contract extension with the Spurs. So they invested in him. They see the upside. And last season, he was nearly 20 points per game on 47% shooting and 37% from three. He's gotten better over the years as a playmaker. He's given us every single reason to believe that he can end up taking his game to the next level this season. I do think he has all-star level potential, right? So that's another big part about the Spurs offense that a lot of people forget in talking about the addition of Paul or Barnes or Wemby is Devin Vassell. He is here. He's been great so far. He's been a great fit next to Wemby as well, and he has a maturity about him as well. So again, that maturity factor that's very key for younger rebuilding teams as they're trying to figure out how to win games. So just keep an eye on Vassell as well. But I've been a very big fan of him because of his maturity, his efficiency, and his ability to create shots for himself. And then obviously there's Wemby, who I'm really interested to see where his game goes this coming season. What other ways does Popovich use him, especially around a guy like Chris Paul? But given these additions and what they already had last season, there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about how good this Spurs offense could end up being this coming season. So the improvement will definitely be there, right? Will it be enough for them to be a play-in tournament team? I don't know. So there's the question about what the expectations are for the Spurs. How good can they be from a winning standpoint? But I think the biggest thing about this coming season is that it can set the stage for something great past this coming season, right? So if they experience more winning this year and do end up competing for the play-in, what we've seen from young teams is that experience with winning pushes them to get even better year in and year out. So the OKC Thunder, perfect example. I think they're like the blueprint for a lot of rebuilding teams to follow. They make the play-in tournament in 2023, and they take that experience, and they end up being the top seed in the West the following year. Pelicans, when they were in the bubble, they were a really good young team. They made the playoffs or just missed the playoffs in 2020, and they turned themselves into a pretty consistent threat in the West when healthy. Highlighting when healthy, right? Because they're only bad when they're not healthy, but when they are healthy, they are a major threat in the West, right? So experiencing winning, which they could do at some level this coming season, increases the chance of winning consistently over a set amount of years. It sounds obvious, but it's true. So even if this season they're on the borderline of being a play-in tournament team, which they have the potential to be, it could set the stage and really accelerate this rebuilding process. And it all comes back to this point of optimizing the environment around Victor Wembanyama. And I think they have just done an amazing job at that so far this offseason with these additions that are going to help them a lot from an offensive standpoint and their maturity on that end, and maybe from a defensive standpoint. But the Spurs are in a really, really good spot right now in just really year two of this Victor Wembanyama era rebuild. I'm excited to see what they do this coming season. As I said, only thing really stopping them is defense and health. But if the health at least comes together, then they're going to be a major threat as far as the younger teams in the Western Conference go and competing and jockeying for a position as far as being one of the better younger teams in the NBA. So we'll see how things end up turning out. But they have a lot going for them, and I'm just excited to see how they end up executing this coming year under Greg Popovich.